Our next guest is Steve Young. He's no stranger. He's a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, and now is you see him on Monday Night Football with ESPN. Steve, thanks so much for joining us
Mark.
To make the Hall of Fame case.
And patience with me.
That's all right.
We had 3 different starts. I got kicked out of my office by my wife. I couldn't find the right time. I mean, you guys are patient. Nice work.
Well, we know that you're busy, so we just appreciate your time to help us, because the reason we're here is to help make the case for Roger Craig to be in the Hall of Fame. It's long overdue. And so I want to start off by saying you're still very involved in the football community, the NFL community. Do you ever hear anything that might give us some idea of why Roger is still not in the Hall of Fame? Or do you have any idea yourself?
It's hard. I've watched this now for 25 years, I guess. And the problem is that once you miss the window and then age out, then things get really hard because there's just more and more great players coming.
Yeah.
And so, it becomes a numbers game, and it's unfortunate. And I think there's also, I don't know. I mean, the great teams, the 49ers are during the 80s and 90s are one of the great runs of football history, right? Pittsburgh and the Patriots now. And so the Hall of Fame needs to pay that off. You know what I mean? And so the only thing I can think of is they feel like they paid it off in some way. Like, oh, we did our work and we got to just wake them back up, to the reality that there were Hall of Fame, there were, 5 Hall of Fame players on that team, that there were 6 Hall of Fame players on that team, regardless of whether you think, the Pittsburgh Steelers teams, I think that there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 through those, that Pittsburgh Steeler run,
right.
in the 70s and the early 80s. And so that's 8 or 9, maybe 8 or 9, I don't know. So, clearly we haven't hit that limit yet. So,
yeah.
And so I don't know. And then it really is 39 writers like yourself, media people who are voters who decide it. And so we're not, this is not a publicity, this is not a broad-based voting. We're not trying to sway lots of people. We're trying to sway 39 people.
Right.
And hopefully they'll watch.
Is there anything to this East Coast bias? We hear that a lot, especially with teams and players on the West Coast. Is that a real thing, or is that just more of an excuse?
No, I think that there's. I don't think that people on the East Coast realize it. When we talk about it, we feel it, but they like, what? What? You're crazy. And I think what it is most of the football teams are kind of Chicago and East. There's a handful of teams in the West. And the truth is, other than when the 49ers are great, or the Rams pop up, or the Raiders pop up, or even Seattle pops up, that's not, it's just, the bias is more just the weight of this, of how it tilts, right? And so when the 49ers were great, I think it helped just wake people up to West Coast football. The Raiders did that early. We did it for a long time. Seattle's done a nice job here and there, and the Rams did won a championship. So, and Denver. So Kansas City, I don't know how they look at it, but it's the bias is really just a numbers game and what teams have the weight. You know what I mean? And it's weird. Like Dallas is an East Coast biased team. Like they get it. They're in the East Coast and they're in the NFC East, and they can play anybody. It's a big game. You're like, well, why?
Right.
No. Why do we care about that game? They're terrible. But it's just the Giants, anyone in Pittsburgh. It's just. I think it's just. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just human nature.
Yeah. Last year, I wrote a story for 49ers Web Zone that you were a part of, where we made the case for Roger Craig with some information from Larry Krueger, who at that time was with KMBR. And when I got the statement from you, and this podcast series is being built around that story, you said Roger was a thermostat player. His talent and spirit raised us all when we lagged. What do you mean by that? How did he raise the temperature of the team on and off the field?
Roger was high knees and high spirits. Like that's just the knees are, I think, our metaphor for how he lived his life. And if you see Roger today, same thing. Like, hey, what are you doing? Where are we going? What's happening? And that's a natural God-given talent, gift of spirit that Roger has, and I always will have. And I think that's great teams need all kinds of people, and Roger played a unique role. The thing that I think historically the thing that creates the most momentum for Roger to be voted in by those 39 is to make the case that where football has gone today, Roger was the back that started it all. Like the idea that in the West Coast offense, you needed someone who could line up in all the positions, who could run it from the eye, who could catch it on the wide, could line up in the slot, like all the things. And you look at the death of the eye back, the death of the split backs, like the guys that couldn't do that can't play football today. And so you just don't want to be on the ash heap of players that are positions and styles that are dead. Mm-hmm. Like they're just gone. And the eye back is dead. So I would not want to be, any back today that can't. They're all leaving the game. They're all getting, they're all going away quickly in the last 4 or 5 years. There's only a couple of eye backs left, and I don't think they're going to be catching a job unless they can transition to a Roger Craig type of game. Right. And so in that way, I think when you're voting for the Hall of Fame and you see you have Hall of Fame credentials and you were the founding member of what became the profile of exactly what a running back needs to be today, I think there's a lot of energy in that. It's like, pay that off, pay that uniqueness that you brought to the game that was looked at as an anomaly and maybe a reason not to be voted in back 20 years ago. But today, an absolute reason to be voted in because the game came to Roger Craig. Yeah. The game today has come to him. And so I think that's a statement for the 39 voters to think about, like, pay that off. Because because the Hall of Fame running backs today are all going to be Roger Craig kind of players, just by nature.
Ronnie Lott said that whenever you're the first to do something, that means a lot. And of course, Roger Craig was the first running back to score 3 touchdowns in a Super Bowl, the first 1,000. And so I think that rings home that whenever you're the first to do something, as Ronnie said, that really means a lot, and as you have mentioned, should be considered. What did my last question for you is really a 2-part question. What did getting into the Hall of Fame mean to you? And along those lines, since Roger Craig has had to wait so long, what do you think it would mean to him to be elected to the Hall of Fame?
Well, so much of the game, there's always 2 things that you hold in suspense. There's the sense of team and a sense of, I got to make a career for myself. And, and doing both those is an athletic event. And I think the Hall of Fame pays off that I made a career for myself. You know what I mean? It's like, I think that's why it's 5 years later. It's like, it's not necessarily, you get there with a lot of help and a lot of great players around you and all that. We get that in football. But I think that sense that you start singularly as a college player and you want to go try to make a career, and you made that career, and at the end you made it a Hall of Fame career is pretty profound. It's very, very meaningful. For me, particularly, we talk about, doing things differently. I mean, I got kicked out of Tampa Bay because I was a scrambler, lefty, and they hated players like me. Coaches couldn't stand it, and they couldn't see any of the possibilities and with Bill Walsh, not only he see possibilities, he saw an advantage. And that was, so, paying that off to kind of forging new territory. How many times did I hear about being left-handed or being a scrambler? And I was like, geez, how many passing titles do I need to win before you stop saying that? But because it was just done so differently, they couldn't register the excellence at the position because it looked different than the way they thought it should look. Mm-hmm. And I say that about Roger Craig earlier, but I have to say myself, like, the game's come to me. The guys that are going to rule the NFL for the next, 10, 20, 30, I have no idea. But the game has become so much more wide open for the quarterback. And you've got to be able to get all those free yards that are out there and first downs and touchdowns. And if you don't, you're not going to win Super Bowls. And so in that way, that's what the Hall of Fame for me is very, very meaningful, because I think it said, hopefully, to all those guys coming that, despite, I don't want to say discrimination. I just say the lack of understanding mm-hmm. for the capability. Because the truth is, once you could pair excellence in the pocket and running, you couldn't be stopped. That was the best thing going. And that's what Patrick Mahomes realizes today, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, all those guys. Lamar Jackson's trying to learn how to become that sophisticated passer, because you can see how he can run. And any young player is going to have to kind of match that. So that's what the Hall of Fame meant to me.
Yeah, and just like you were something different, Roger Craig was as well. And as you've put it well, that the Hall of Fame needs to pay to come good on that. Steve, thanks so much for your time, for helping us make the case for Roger Craig.
Well, thanks for caring about Roger. Roger's somebody you want to take care of. Roger is. We opened the podcast talking about the spirit of Roger Craig, and it just feels like a bust in Canton would, like, he'll make the bust in Canton more alive and rich because of who he is and who he will be. So, yeah, good luck.
He definitely deserves it for sure.
Right. Take care, Mark. Thanks so much.